If the Mafia's empire in Cuba seemed untouchable, it wasn't. So what brought it crashing down? The answer lies with Fidel Castro and his revolutionary movement. While Havana glittered with wealth and excess, another story was unfolding far from the city's neon lights. Deep in Cuba's rugged mountains, a revolution was brewing. A revolution that would change the fate of the island and bring the Mafia's golden age to a crashing halt.
We will establish a real, representative, and democratic government.
Tell me something about the plight of the ordinary Cuba.
The first plight now is the lack of freedom and justice. And after that, a low standard of living, hundreds of thousands of young men without job. But Cuba is a rich country with a wonderful future if we only have good governments.
Fidel Castro was no ordinary rebel. A young lawyer with a sharp mind and fiery rhetoric, Castro emerged as a voice for the Cuban people, denouncing the corruption and inequality that had defined Batista's regime. His message resonated with those who had been left behind: farmers, laborers, and students who saw in Castro a chance for justice. In 1953, Castro launched his first strike against Batista's government with an attack on the Moncada barracks. The assault failed, and Castro was captured, tried, and imprisoned. But instead of silencing him, it gave him a platform. His courtroom speech, "History will absolve me," turned him into a national figure. After his release, Castro regrouped in exile, recruiting a loyal band of revolutionaries. In 1956, they returned to Cuba aboard a leaky yacht, the Granma, determined to ignite a revolution. Their arrival was met with disaster. Most of the rebels were killed or captured, but a handful, including Castro, escaped into the Sierra Maestra Mountains. From there, they launched a guerrilla war that would ultimately shake the foundations of Batista's rule. While the revolution simmered in the countryside, Havana remained oblivious. Under Batista's protection, the Mafia thrived, raking in millions from casinos, drugs, and prostitution. For Batista, the Mafia's money was essential to maintaining his grip on power. For the mob, Cuba was a paradise, profitable and untouchable. Figures like Meyer Lansky believed their empire in Cuba was secure, but cracks were forming. Batista's increasing reliance on repression alienated his people, and Castro's forces were growing stronger by the day. By late 1958, Castro's guerrilla war was no longer a nuisance. It was a full-blown revolution. Batista's soldiers, poorly trained and demoralized, began to defect. Meanwhile, Castro's forces won the hearts of the Cuban people, promising a new era of equality and independence. While Batista lived in luxury, Castro's forces were advancing toward Havana. On New Year's Day, 1959, the inevitable happened. Batista fled the country, taking millions in stolen wealth with him.
Often the mecca for gamblers sees the jackpot payoff of a political longshot. Bearing 26th of July banners, joyous followers of Fidel Castro sweep triumphantly through the Cuban capital hours after their rebellion had toppled the regime of Fulgencio Batista. The 26th of July refers to that day in 1953 when Castro began his long struggle to overthrow the dictator Batista with an abortive armed attack. With Batista in flight to the Dominican Republic, the celebrating soon turns to mob action and looting. Gambling machines get the axe.
The streets of Havana erupted in celebration as Castro's army marched into the city. For the Mafia, the revolution was a catastrophe. Castro's government immediately nationalized all foreign-owned assets, including the casinos and hotels run by the mob. Years of bribes and backroom deals vanished overnight as the revolution declared an end to corruption. Mobsters like Lansky and Luciano watched helplessly as their empire crumbled.
Cuba goes on a patriotic binge after the government seizes a score of U.S. companies, a move denounced by Catholic authorities influential in this Catholic country. The name is chiseled from the telephone building and signs torn down from this and other properties worth nearly $1 billion.
Some fled the island with whatever they could carry. Others, like Lansky, lobbied U.S. politicians to intervene. But the Mafia's golden age in Cuba was over. Castro's rise to power didn't just mark the end of Batista's dictatorship. It marked the end of an era for the Mafia, a harsh reminder that even the most powerful empires can crumble in the face of revolution. The Cuban Revolution wasn't just a blow to the Mafia, it was a wake-up call for the world. In the ruins of Havana's casinos, a new Cuba was born, one that rejected the greed and corruption of the past, for better or for worse. But for the Mafia, the dream of a Caribbean empire was gone, and the fallout would ripple across the criminal underworld for years to come. The story of the Italian Mafia in Cuba is one of ambition, corruption, and consequence. It's a tale of how greed can shape a nation. Today, the ruins of old casinos stand as a reminder of Havana's complicated past. What do you think? Should the Mafia's time in Cuba be remembered as a golden age of glamour or a dark chapter in the island's history? Let us know in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe to the channel down below for more videos like this.